uh, Subcommittee on Cannabis Oversight to order. I'm Adam Eben, Senator Eben, chairing the committee today. Lindley, did you want to take the roll?
Senator McClellan, Senator McDougall, Senator McPike,
Here.
Delegate Adams,
Present.
Delegate Campbell, Delegate Krizak,
Here.
Delegate Moorfield,
Here.
Delegate Scott,
Here.
Delegate Herring,
Here.
Senator Eben.
Here, and we've been joined by Senator McClellan, so she's present as well. We have a number of items to walk through today and try and get some consensus, but I want to start with the work group to study policy proposals for expedited sale of cannabis. Delegate Scott had chaired that work group, and are you prepared to explain some of the options that you all had discussed?
I'm prepared to discuss the option that we came to a final decision on, if that's okay.
Please go ahead.
So after our committee meeting and after hearing comment from the public on several issues, we agreed to recommend that we move the date for legalization up to July 1, 2022, or to the earliest possible date feasible. We understand that there are some challenges. I'm sure there are members here who remember some of those. Some of the bigger challenges had to do with the Cannabis Control Authority not having hired a executive director yet. It had to do with who would have oversight, whether it is the Board of Pharmacy or I'm trying to remember all the CCA during that time, and so we were making some recommendations that the same folks that oversee the medical providers would oversee the new adult use legalization process as well until the CCA was stood up in the alternative, since they won't be stood up by July 1. And that was some of the challenges, and we wanted to make it clear also in those conversations on how we regulate synthetics and other non-regulated products now that might have some psychotropic impact. So we wanted to have those conversations too on how that might be regulated and whether there be any penalties associated with those other products that we know are out there now. I think Delegate Adams is well aware of some of those products that are out there now that are unregulated, and so we wanted to talk about that as well. But as far as just the date, our recommendation from that committee was that we legalize July 1 and have legislation entered to that effect.
Okay,
July 1, 2022.
Or as early as feasible after July 1, if not. But I think that just a few considerations to point out before we open up to discussion. If we go with July 1, if I understand correctly, you were suggesting, or it was discussed, that the Board of Pharmacy could regulate that because it would only be at the existing pharmaceutical sales points right now. So that would be the regulator if it were July 1st.
It would only be because the way we're contemplating it, because we don't have other licensed providers now. The only licensed providers right now are the pharmaceutical folks who would be able to sell adult use. So because they're already being regulated by that agency, it would be easier to capture them, and we'd have to start making sure that the levels were the same, the THC levels remained the same, because they're the only ones that have the product now in the state to be able to distribute it. And so we'd have to set up a way and a plan to be able to get the income to be able to help stand up the other partners in equity, social equity partners, through that mechanism of the pharmaceuticals getting financed.
Okay, so the issues as I see them are the date and the regulator being the Board of Pharmacy, if that gives people heartburn or approval. And I think people on the committee have feelings about it, and I want to recognize Delegate Adams first if she'd like to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to comment because my concern with those recommendations have to do with the Board of Pharmacy's inability to really meet the demands within the medical program now. And I'm concerned that they are so overwhelmed that to add another piece within a system, even though that's the pathway, I think I think also it detracts from the absolute need to have an agency dedicated to cannabis. And so for me, and it's something that I work with every day, and I know what patients are dealing with. I feel like it would be an incredibly heavy lift and an inefficient agency to head such a big transition. That's my concern.
Are there other members of the subcommittee who'd like to address the recommendation?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Senator McClellan.
It was a little bit hard to hear Delegate Scott down here, and so is the proposal that he referenced in writing in our packet, or if not, if you could repeat? I heard July 1st, 2022, based on the discussion. I assume that means it would be the Board of Pharmacy, but Senator McPike and I didn't quite fully hear the full recommendation.
There are, David May, our counsel, has drafted up bills for the different possibilities, and in your notebook, there's a packet in the last tab. They're heading before the bills, and it says Board of Pharmacy. There's one that says, is there one that says July 1?
There's,
For Board of Pharmacy? The first
yes,
one.
the first one.
Okay, so the first bill in the last tab is one way to possibly proceed if we went with that recommendation.
Yeah, we don't have tabs, but. It's the first tab. You all have tabs? Not tabs.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my book.
I don't have I don't have the fancy tab.
We did the best we could. We gave you
So-
notebooks, so we're happy to clear that hurdle. But there's a header on the sheet ahead of the bill that says Board of Pharmacy, July 1, 2022, and that's language that could be worked from, but with potential adjustments. And before we come to a final vote on this, I'm going to ask, I will take comment just because this is a big step forward. But are there other members of the committee who have questions or concerns? Senator McClellan.
I mean, again, question, since I wasn't on the work group, is does the Board of where is the Board of Pharmacy on, how do they view their
Are they here today? We notified them about this and told them about the meeting. Is there a representative of the Board of Pharmacy in the room? They have not weighed in with us.
Okay.
But in terms of the work involved, they would largely be taking the existing facilities that they have purview over for now, and it would be those same facilities. But there would be a retail side, and the big difference would be that there'd be taxes collected from the retail sales at the same co-located locations.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator.
Does the Board of Pharmacy currently collect taxes from any entity?
Not to my knowledge. I believe prescription medicines are not taxed.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator McClellan.
Have we had any discussions with them over whether they would need to establish a mechanism to collect those taxes, either online? Would they partner with the Department of Taxation? Is that spelled out in the proposed legislation?
The Department of Taxation would be key to doing that, but I have not discussed it in depth with the Board of Pharmacy.
Senator, it's on page, well, it's line 49, 50.
Yeah, the bill calls on line 50 for the pharmaceutical processors to be remitting the tax to the Department of Taxation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Moorfield, Senator McPike, any other comments, or Delegate Krizak, or Delegate Herring?
Could council show us where the language differs between those two options with the Board of Pharmacy versus the Control Board?
Mr. Chair, So, yeah, we can, depending on how you want me to do it, we can go through the drafts individually, and I can show you the pieces, or I can explain them generally, and then go to specific points if you want, at the wish of the commissioner.
You're not that long, it's 3 pages. You want to go through it?
I'll-
If the chair's okay with him just going through it?
That would
It's
be-
only a 3-page. All right.
That would be fine.
Okay, so just from a 50,000-foot view, the drafts, 99% of the drafts are the same. There's 6 versions. The first 3, the system would be regulated by the Board of Pharmacy. The second 3, it would be regulated by the Board of Directors of the CCA. And then between those 2 separate versions, the only thing that changes is the date. So it would either start this July, next January, or the following July. Other than that, everything else in the drafts is the same, which basically is what the pharmaceutical processors are doing right now. We're just not going to require anyone to have this written certificate or registration. Basically, you don't have to have a medical need any longer, but everything else is going to stay the same. So they would actually operate, for instance, in the first draft under the Board of Pharmacy, they would operate under the current Board of Pharmacy regulations, subject to a few extra requirements and exceptions. So we've got packaging requirements that are different. These are things that would be different than the regulations. Packaging requirements, reporting requirements, the number of plants that you can cultivate, inventory and register requirements, plan submissions to the board, $1 million fee for participating in this scheme, and a 21% excise tax, advertising restrictions, quantity limits that can be sold to an individual person, requirements regarding the location at which they can be sold, and prohibition on delivery, and also a provision that allows the board to suspend the privileges of a pharmaceutical manufacturer or processor who has substantial and repeated violations of the act. And then the bill would expire or sunset when pharmaceutical processors could get a license from the CCA to, engage in adult sales underneath the scheme that we created last year.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Delegate Krizak.
Quick question. Is there any, I know now that if you go to one of the pharmacies, you can purchase their medical marijuana from that come from different pharmacies or different producers or medical providers. So is there anything in here that would require actually require that they are open to selling other product, or, that they wouldn't just be, they wouldn't only be able to sell just what they produce?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Krizak, there are no requirements. If there was a requirement, which it appears that there's not in the Board of Pharmacy regulations, that would apply, but we do not have a requirement like that in this act.
Just follow up real quickly. So in the actual, the marijuana, the bill, the cannabis bill that needs reenactment, do we have anything like that? Is there any, or is that something that the board would, the authority would be regulating? For example, selling competing producers marijuana?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Krizak, so the system contemplated by the big bill subject to reenactment is a little different in that most people will not be able to vertically integrate, so they'll always be selling someone else's product. So the only time it would really come into play would be for the pharmaceutical processors who we have given the privilege to vertically integrate underneath the provisions of the bill. But we left that also in the hands of the board to be able to add restrictions so that, the board would have the authority to go in and say, you got to sell other people's products as well. And if they weren't and we wanted to do that, we could add that requirement in.
Delegate Adams?
Mr. Chair, is this the right time to talk about contents of this, or are we only talking about or picking either the board or the CCA at this point?
If you have a point about the content, feel free to raise it.
So in the first draft or any of the pharmaceutical drafts, line 18, 19, it basically says dedicate a register at facility to registered patient sales and maintain sufficient inventory as determined by the pharmaceutical processors. I have concerns about that language.
Which line are you referring to?
So it's line 18, section D. At least it is on my PDF. here.
that's right.
And you're concerned with that language?
Yes, so my concern is that because it's prescribing dedicate a register, to be frank, I'm really a strong advocate of the medical cannabis programs, and that's this lens that I'm coming from. I worry that, I think it's great that the medical processors can participate on the front end of this, and also that we have the availability to potentially move things up because of it. That being said, I think that there should be a higher percentage of registers, if we're going to talk about it that way, in the 70%, 70-30 range, where there's an obligation to the medical patient. I could talk about some of the lessons that I've personally learned over the last 2 years, but I can tell you that, in some of the dispensaries, from the get-go, has been an overwhelming focus on the adult market from the beginning. Focus on things like shatter and butter and concentrates that for many, many Virginians who have entered the medical market, those products do not apply. And what they struggle with is getting some kind of consistency in products around tinctures, around edibles, around the medicines that actually work for them. And some of these people are in very fragile conditions where if you variate that formula, it changes a lot. So I think, it's great to have adult use as a part of this because it could decrease the cost to patients. But I worry that in 6 registers, at any particular shop, I'm just making up that number, and 1 is for patients. That's exactly what we'll get in terms of focus, and that concerns me. And the second piece, if I just may say,
Please.
I feel like we should have some kind of reporting structure where it's not at the behest of the processor to determine what the need is, but it's really a response to the patient. And so I'm concerned about that language as well. Thank you.
I don't want to wordsmith too much, but would you be more comfortable if it read something like dedicate sufficient registers at each facilities to adequately facilitate registered patient sales and maintain sufficient inventory as determined by, and instead of saying pharmaceutical processor as determined by the Board of Pharmacy? Oh, yeah, I'm getting at patient need. I'm just saying that the way it's worded now, it says as determined by the processor, whereas you probably want the Board of Pharmacy or someone else who's looking out for patients as their goal to be the one to be satisfied.
Mr. Chair, I like that sort of direction. I guess I just don't know what the mechanism is currently to sort of understand what patient need is and what that driving, because I don't think we're collecting that kind of data, which is so important. But I think that's a missing piece in the conversation. But and I don't, at least in my experience, I don't think that the Board of Pharmacy would be knowledgeable of that information. And again, I think there's a real capacity issue. The Board of Pharmacy has taken in tons of money, and yet they don't have what they need to run the program that they're running now. I mean, they're struggling. And so, I don't know that that's the right thing. I definitely think there's got to be a way to capture the need of patients. And I think what's hard about it all is that if you're a patient and you're going in and A, B, and C are available, but you need D, you'll take C and so then that's a false narrative around what the need is. And so those are the kind of I know that's kind of nuanced, but those are worrisome things when we're talking about prescribing the language of how this will be set up.
Okay, points well taken. If we do go ahead with this approach, I'll be sure and consult with you before we finalize language from here. Are there any other members of the subcommittee who want to talk before we open this up further? Okay. Since this is a big policy change, and I want to take comment from members of the audience who'd like to come forward and limit your remarks to the idea of early sales and who would be supervising the early sales. If that's okay, introduce yourself and come forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. My name is Hunter Jamerson. I'm an attorney for Jushi, which is the pharmaceutical processor based in Manassas, Virginia, servicing Health Service Area 2. I appreciate the Commission's review of the concept of early sales and the work of Delegate Scott's work group on early sales. We enthusiastically endorse the recommendation for a July 1 of 22 start date, as well as for regulation by the Board of Pharmacy, and I'll briefly articulate why. Delegate Adams raised, I think, some important considerations about the Board of Pharmacy, and she, needless to say, has been a true champion for the medical program, and we're very pleased to continue to work with her in that capacity. And I think the concern she raised with regard to the Board of Pharmacy is, is that temporary stop the best stop, or should we be looking to a standalone regulator? Our challenge is that we don't yet have a robust standalone regulator. We also look forward to that day when the CCA would absorb both the medical program and the adult use program in its regulatory purview. But I'm not sure we have the luxury of time at the moment, because we do have a real public safety consideration in Virginia right now with legalized possession but not legalized sales. As a result, you've read the same articles I have. People are buying product on the street, and unfortunately, at times, those street products are laced with fentanyl. As a result, people are dying. I just don't think we have the luxury of time to wait for a full-fledged regulator dedicated to adult use sales. In the meantime, we've got the Board of Pharmacy. They're used to regulating this program on the medical side. The bill before you from Mr. May presents that we would only sell the same medical products that the board has approved already to an adult use population. And I think that consistency of regulation will allow for the Board of Pharmacy to be an efficient intermediary prior to transition to the CCA for final review. The other area here I think is important to note, I think Mr. May pointed out in lines 47 through 50, there will be a tax structure for these early sales, but the pharmaceutical processor shall remit that tax on line 50 directly to the Department of Taxation. So we're not calling upon the Board of Pharmacy to do things they don't already do. We're just calling them to continue to regulate adult use products, to continue to regulate medical products, and to ensure continuity of care. We think that's going to be successful because the Board of Pharmacy presently ensures through a robust set of regulations that carry through in this bill, as well as through a very meticulous testing standard, that safe products are going to patients. This would allow those safe products to carry through in the adult use space as well. I'm very sympathetic to the concerns that were raised about access of medical patients. I think it's important to note any cash register at the pharmaceutical processor could be used for medical sales. I think the concept in line 18 is to ensure that at least one line is dedicated only to medical sales, so medical patients wouldn't be left waiting and it would in fact be prioritized. We're certainly amenable to ensuring that that's the case, that medical patients are the priority. That is the primary purpose of the processors.
Question for you. Right now, do you know how many lanes or registers Jushi has open typically at a time?
Yes, sir. Each facility is different across the pharmaceutical processors. Jushi has 5 active stations in its dispensary. And
during their operating hours, are all 5 stations usually open, or a minimum of a certain number?
Depending on the day and the demand and staffing, but each of those 5 stations is able to be staffed depending on how many technicians are available that day.
I see. Okay. Thank you, Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Hunter. So have you heard reports, because I have, that there are lines now at some of the dispensaries for medical patients?
I can only speak to Jushi's operations. I've not spoken to others. I imagine, depending on the time of day and the demand, there could well be lines.
Yeah, that's part of my concern. And then secondarily, and I totally get the perspective you're sharing, and I think you get the perspective I'm sharing. The problem is, one, the Board of Pharmacy isn't here, which I don't know what that says. I know what it says to me. And I'm concerned that I don't know what that management infrastructure is going to look like, right? But under the current infrastructure, they're very challenged. So my question is, and I don't know if we have the capacity to do this, if there's a way to have a manager that cares about cannabis as a subsection of this transition piece embedded in the Board of Pharmacy. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I can tell you my concern is even if you do this and you put the July 1 I think sort of it could go on forever in the system that we have now. That's my concern.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Adams, I think those are absolutely fair considerations. I would imagine that this bill, as it moved forward, would be accompanied by a budget amendment to appropriately staff the Board of Pharmacy, particularly its enforcement section, which is where I think the real amplification is going to be needed. And I say that because enforcement is where more human beings are going to be necessary in order to effectively carry this out. The rules are going to be the same under this bill for how the processor would operate, how the processor would carry on its operations. I don't envision the board's policy staff needing to spend significant additional time, but I do envision a significant amplification of enforcement, scrutinizing sales, scrutinizing operations, scrutinizing public safety, and that, of course, comes at a cost. I share your interest in having a dedicated individual overseeing adult use sales because that person is not presently a staff member of the Board of Pharmacy today. I think we have the same dilemma at the Cannabis Control Authority, our greater dilemma being in the interest of time and expediency. We have an agency that's robust, informed, and presently regulating the medical market today. We see that as the best available option to quickly ensure state regulation of what's presently illicit sales.
Thank you, Mr. Jamerson. Are there any other questions for the witness? Okay. Are there other?
I have a quick question.
Delegate Scott.
What would you anticipate, based on your understanding, of what your sales would be? I mean, we have in this, I think on line, I forget which line it's piece, but we have a $1 million fee for the pharmaceutical providers, and you just said that we might have to incur additional short-term costs because we know this is a transition piece until we get to CCA. What's y'all's anticipated sales for the first year, and then that may be able to help us fund this because a lot of folks are going to be talking about making sure that we pay as we go, and if we can raise this from $1 million to $10 million, then I'm sure that you guys can cover that cost, but just let me know what you think that number may look like. Thank you. That was a wise move you made. I'm sure your boss will give you a raise for pointing that out. But go ahead, see if we can get more money out of you guys.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Scott, thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. I'll deflect by saying I don't know the answer to what our first year sales would be. I know that JLARC has studied in some depth and published our potential sales. I know that other states have with mature adult use markets are now realizing hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. Those are mature markets. Obviously, year one would not approach that. And there's comprehensive adult use markets. We're talking about 4 processors in a very small piece of the pie there in those marketplaces. What I would say to your considerations of cost, however, is that the bill Mr. Mays put before you empowers the Board of Pharmacy to assess such fees as necessary in lines 55 through 57 to administer this program. So, to the extent there are additional costs, they may well be non-general fund costs assessed through to the processors for these operations.
We've got 2 more members waiting to be recognized. Delegate Krizak first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to get back to the very first question that came from Delegate Adams. And that is, and I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, and there's probably a lot of elephants in this room actually, but this is one of the herd, and that is, what is there here to stop or to make sure that the pharmaceuticals do not stop selling medical marijuana and just go full bore into the adult use? And not just to have an easy pass register that's for the, but that you're really going to have all the options. You're going to have the gummies, you're going to have the liquid, whatever. You're going to have everything that the patients need. and that's going to be at the expense of the more lucrative adult market.
Can I direct you, Delegate Krizek, on lines 18 and 19, it talks about maintaining adequate inventory of cannabis products to satisfy the demands of such patients. And the one that calls for a register too, that might be a section that would need to be beefed up perhaps.
And
I don't know if you want
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Krizek, I would echo the chair's comments with regard to the obligations placed upon the processors in 18 and 19, but I would also go further to say nothing in the proposed bill here obviates the processor of their existing medical processor license requirements. Those medical license processor requirements include, at the regulatory level, minimum sufficient inventories and ensuring patient access. That's not to say there haven't been lines at times. That's not to say that every product is always in stock. Mr. Chairman, Delegate Krizek, to a question you raised earlier, the wholesale provisions are carried through in this bill. Pharmaceutical processors would be allowed to wholesale products, both medical and adult use, interchangeably, and they do so today because not all processors make all products. Some have different specialties, and they presently rotate those products across Virginia to ensure access. That would carry through. But I think it's important to note, nothing proposed here takes away any responsibility that we don't already have to our medical patients. And these processors have spent $35 million to service these medical patients. They are committed to servicing these medical patients.
Thank you.
Delegate Herring?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And picking up on Delegate Adams' comment on somebody dedicated, I think I would like to add some language. I just can't figure out where to put it on the Board of Pharmacy, having somebody dedicated to overseeing a program. And then another sort of edit or recommendation is on line 55, when we're talking about money, the $1 million, right, for a one-time $1 million fee to the Department of Taxation. You may want to add on line 55, notwithstanding section 1(1)(f), because otherwise, you're right, I would argue I've already paid it, so. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And are there others in the audience who'd like to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Unless you have more, or you?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. We
Thank you.
appreciate your support.
Okay. Well, I want to raise two other points. One point is, in the bill that we passed last year with the reenactment clause, we allowed for an opt-out for retail sales by referendum on November 1st of this coming year 2022. And we're talking about possibly beginning retail sales before July 1st, before the November general election, which would in effect mean that people could start selling retail at their co-located locations, and then a few months later be told that they could no longer sell them if there was an opt-out referendum in that locality. So that's a consideration. And I don't know if there's a good way around it. So, another option is a later date, but I hear a need, or I hear a recommendation for a July 1st date. Are there any other comments on that?
Yes, Mr.
Delegate
Chair.
Herring.
And I don't want to move back a date, but just thinking about process, should the General Assembly pass language like this, will there be enough time for the Board of Pharmacy to set up operations and get ready? I know we say that they already collect taxes, but the reality is finding that person, that right person, to oversee. And I hate to move back a date, but I'm wondering if we take it back to October. It's just a thought, but it gives more time.
Yeah, I prefer a date certain myself. I hate to be secondhand, but I was told that during the presentation to the Cannabis Control Authority Board, the Board of Pharmacy said it does not want to temporarily oversee adult use. Honestly, the question to me is whether they could do that, because they will do what we direct them to do if we decide it's in the mission of the.
Mr. Chair.
Who's that? Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the components that were also discussed in the subcommittee, I know that the different public health and other boards have begun to form, and I was just wondering if we could maybe get any sort of update from agency staff on some of those components, because as you recall, during our deliberation from last year, we also had the public health information to put out there, sort of the consumer advocacy side of things to make sure the public had enough information as this access to retail sales came out. And so we had a number of different steps that are outside of sort of advancing. I don't have opposition to advancing retail sales, but I do want to make sure that we have the information out to the public that we also anticipated. And part of those were also sort of contemplated within the Cannabis Advisory Board and their supporting Public Health Advisory Board. And so there's a mesh of different things that I think we all look to. We put a lot of work in consideration. And, maybe, if we can have some discussion around how these proposals would blend. And, it'd be helpful maybe to get an update on some of the boards and commissions' work. I know they're forming. I know that we're starting to staff up. We're starting to get some of the components, but maybe that would help also this commission.
Okay, thank you. Megan Field is here. Megan, would you like to come forward? Just tell us what the latest is with the CCA, particularly the health board or other related developments, particularly as it would apply to them having capacity.
Yep. Hi, good afternoon. Great to see you all. So I can give you an update on what the Cannabis Control Authority Board of Directors is doing, and also a briefer update on the Public Health Advisory Council. The Cannabis Control Authority Board of Directors is moving forward with hiring. So actually, they met last week to review resumes for 2 positions. One is the Chief Government and External Affairs Officer. So this person does policy and communications. And the second is specifically the Health Policy Advisor position, which is a position named in the Cannabis Control Act. That Health Policy Advisor has 2 jobs. They staff the Public Health Advisory Council, and they help with the public health messaging that Senator McPike was just discussing. So they're actually meeting tomorrow to move forward with that. Hiring is confidential, so I shouldn't get into the details of that, but the board is working really carefully to walk this tight line of not spending money that it doesn't need to, given the uncertainty of reenactment, but also, continuing to build that infrastructure for the agency and its own expertise as a board to be poised to jump into action depending on what happens with reenactment. So the board has, over the last few meetings, had experts in different areas of this. They've heard from state police about drug driving. They've heard from the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth about that public health campaign. They've heard from the Board of Pharmacy about the medical program. So the board is building out its own expertise and also moving forward with agency infrastructure. Everyone remembers that JLARC thought it would take, 6 months to basically have staff and printers in. We're getting close to that place. They basically have a lease they're ready to move on when the timing makes sense. They've got IT plans and they've got this first staff who we shared those job positions with you all. So they should be continuing to build in the spring, but they are in a tough place where they want to be good stewards of the public dollar. They don't want to overspend until it's clear exactly what their mandate's going to be. And so that's the CCA. I did just briefly mention the public health campaign that's actually ongoing. So you all included $1 million in this fiscal year budget for a public health campaign specifically focused on, with a emphasis on college-aged young people who we know are at particular risk for suffering harm from cannabis use. So the Virginia Department of Health and the Virginia Foundation of Healthy Youth are well into development of that program. Virginia Foundation of Healthy Youth has actually gotten to the place where it's testing messages with different focus groups to see what lands well, to make sure that they put out something that young people actually are interested in listening to, not something they brush off. They expect to do some media buys, including social media, in early 2022. And the Virginia Department of Health is coordinating with the local community service boards to make sure that, different localities who have very different needs are able to target their programs specifically. So those programs are under the way. I'm sure either of those agencies would be happy to come and share the work they're doing. They're pretty far along. And then really quickly, the Virginia State Police has started training more drugged driving recognition experts. You all also included $1 million in this fiscal year for the state police. So they're also well under the way. They've graduated their first class already. That includes officers from Virginia State Police, but also officers from local departments around the state. So the Public Health Advisory Council, which you all will remember has these sort of dual roles. One, they generally have the responsibility for monitoring trends related to cannabis use and abuse, but then they also have to approve any health-related regulations that the CCA writes. So there's some specified in code, but there's also this vague, just any health-related regulations. That board met for the first time. It was really just to get a chance to get grounded in their statutory responsibilities, to meet each other, to elect some leadership. The interesting setup of that board is they're chaired by the Secretary of Health and Human Resources. So they elected a vice chair who can provide some continuity as the administration changes. They're not going to meet again this calendar year, and I don't think they've set the next date. That'll probably, be something that the board works out with whoever our next Secretary of Health and Human Resources is. But I hope that answers the question. I'm happy to answer specifics if there are specific questions about what the different bodies are up to.
McPike, do you have further questions?
Well, I guess, thank you, Megan, for your update to us. And Mr. Chair, I think the question would be probably more to council in terms of the last point that was brought up, which is we had sort of anticipated the CCA to sort of work with the health to sort of adopt guidance and transfer back to the CCA in terms of the health aspects. How does this crosswalk with the pharmacy aspect in the CCA? And it's sort of hands off, and we're sort of delegating everything to pharmacy and sort of codifying 500 milligrams of X within, infused and sort of specifying very clearly certain things. If maybe council can help us walk through what we had sort of left in the open and then what we're sort of specifying in the proposals before us, that would help me to wrap my mind around what we're anticipating in the future scenarios as we accelerate what it means to us today.
Mr. Chair, Senator McPike, the legislation before you does not contemplate any involvement. But the Board of Pharmacy draft, so the first draft that we're talking about primarily, doesn't contemplate any involvement by the CCA or any of its boards, including the health board, except for involvement in the plan that's submitted by the pharmaceutical processor regarding how they would incubate up to 5 other retailers and educate about responsible consumption and other persons interested in entering the market. But as far as the health implications, it would entirely be within the Board of Pharmacy under the legislation before you.
I guess I have a question. Just I'd like some clarification about why is it that the CCA could not just pick up the infrastructure with the Board of Pharmacy and oversee that, even though maybe it's not in the same building or whatever, and have the authority and the oversight? Because I think somebody said the Board of Pharmacy really didn't want to temporarily oversee adult use. You could argue, if you want to talk about whether they wanted to do the medical program. And so, I think we need leadership in the cannabis space that recognizes the complexity, that can oversee and hold to account. And I just don't understand why, it's just a subsection of pharmacy, right? It's not all of pharmacy. Why can't it just like have the oversight and, kind of lay within the CCA, but, all the infrastructure that supports the pharmacy just transfer over? I guess I'm not understanding that piece.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Senator McClellan?
All right, let me come at this more like a practical.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before I recognize Senator McClellan, was Ms. Field going to answer the question for Delegate Adams?
I don't mean to interrupt, and tell me the right moment, but I'm happy to provide the sort of agency's perspective on implementation timeline.
Please do.
So
You kind of, let me ask my question, because I think you're anticipating it, but I want to make sure we get a clear answer. And that is, knowing what you know now about how it's staffed, when budget language takes effect, when people can be hired, when is the earliest that the Cannabis Control Authority could operate and regulate retail sales?
So to try to answer both questions, as it's currently written, you all gave the Cannabis Control Authority some exemptions from the Administrative Process Act to speed up how quickly it can write regulations. But there is still public notice requirement. The CCA does have to bring regs to its own board and to this commission, and then it needs to respond to substantive feedback from any of those various bodies, from the public, from you all, from its own board. So, it's a little hard to say without knowing exactly what regulations it needs to write. Some are easy, some are a lot more challenging. And, there are consensuses amongst states around some things. But in other spaces, it's really, the variation amongst states is huge. So our best guess is January 23. And that gives enough time for the reality that although they're hiring these 2 staff members now, because they're trying to walk this line of being good stewards of the public dollar, given the uncertainty, they don't want to staff up too much until there's a little more clarity about reenactment. I think you all can imagine that it's difficult to recruit staff if they might be unemployed in 4 months. So really what you have to imagine is reenactment occurs, and then on April, the CCA hits the ground as quickly as it can, building up staff to start developing the regulations. But also, if we're talking about a quicker timeline, at the same time, they need to start building up enforcement staff, taxation staff. So a really quick development, even if it's just 5 entities they're going to be overseeing. Some of that could be sped up by paying for consultants to help with some of it as they do staff up. Of course, that's more expensive. But just as a reminder, you all appropriated $3.5 million for this current fiscal year. So, we're in the second half of that. They have the budget to do it. The governor's budget included about $11 million for FY23, anticipating them gearing up in this way. But, realistically, we're talking April, they hire as quickly as they can. Department of Human Resources Management hiring averages are about 60 days between writing the job and getting someone in the door. So it's probably June before they're, more than a couple of folks there. And then they've got 6 months to get it through all of that public notice and feedback.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, so what I heard was the earliest is January 2023, and any bill that comes out of this commission and is passed by the General Assembly will take effect July 1, 2022. So the question is not whether the Board of Pharmacy wants to regulate for 6 months, but can they regulate for 6 months? And unfortunately, they're not here, but I think what would be very helpful to know is given the resources that they have, can they do this for 6 months? And if not, what budget amendments do we need to put in to get it done? That's basically the question before us, right?
Thank you, Senator. Okay.
Mr. Chair. I'm
Delegate
sorry.
Herring.
I assume that the $1 million fee that's paid by those who seeking, line 25, I assume that was the financing mechanism.
Actually, the $1 million fee in our bill from last year was to go towards incubating social equity applicants.
Okay, and that's still the intent then?
That's my intent, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So, do we have any, yes, Delegate Morefield.
Mr. Chairman, just a suggestion, maybe an idea to raise additional revenue or fees to cover those anticipated expenses. I'm always looking for ways to level the playing field in Southwest and Southside Virginia. And many of you are familiar with hemp farming and hemp processors. And I can assure you that 10 out of 10 hemp farmers who were growing hemp in Southwest Virginia last year are not growing hemp this year. And probably 8 or 9 hemp out of 10 hemp farmers in Southside Virginia are not growing hemp. The market has completely fallen through the floor, and most people in the hemp industry don't anticipate a full recovery anytime soon. And so I believe that, if we're going to level the playing field, we should consider including hemp processors. If some version of this bill is eventually, or if it passes the General Assembly, I certainly think it would be more palatable if there are more opportunities created in those areas.
Excellent point.
So, in addition, I would think that those hemp processors would be more than willing to pay that $1 million fee, which could be applied to further resources in regulating this. And so I just think that's something that we could consider.
Whether or not it's $1 million fee or a lesser fee, I do have in our other items to be discussed after we were settling on this one, and you point out it could be a part of this, to allow a limited number of eligible industrial hemp processor licensees to convert to a cannabis license, the ones that have already operated perhaps above a certain amount.
And one follow-up statement. So these hemp processors have spent millions of dollars, and the infrastructure that's already in place is identical to the infrastructure that the pharmaceutical processors would use. So,
well, there's certain things about whether or not they're like food certified, that sort of thing. But your point is well taken and a good one. Delegate Adams, did you want to comment on this point?
Yes, I guess maybe, is it okay to ask Delegate Field?
Sure.
So I guess my question then becomes, what was the point of the RFPs? Why did we have to have like processors, in 5 and that whole structure where there's 5 processors and you can only have 5 this, and does that eliminate that then if we and do they need to abide by those kind of like RFP? You know what I mean? I'm trying to understand.
I think the hemp processors would be used just to supply the medical people who are doing retail sales now. I don't think you're talking about them all having a license to vertically integrate to the point that each hemp processor would be selling directly. Are you?
well, I mean, I think we should look at all options.
Okay.
I certainly, as I mentioned, I think it would be more palatable in rural areas if those operations have the opportunity to manufacture. So I mean, realistically, they've spent millions of dollars in infrastructure, and I don't foresee, even on the medical marijuana side, a new entity coming in and spending $10-20 million when we already have pharmaceutical processors in place. So, and quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, I believe that those who made those substantial investments will leave. So, on the hemp side. So.
Well, I think we could talk about integrating the hemp people into this industry. In what way? If it's just as supplying and processing, or if there's, how far it goes is another
Chair.
question. Delegate Herring.
Thank you. I guess, look, well, I'll express, I'm concerned. I just remember debates on the floor, and there was a clear distinction, and words were said, this is rope, not dope. And that there's a clear and distinct market. They didn't want any part of this, and now, and I'm fine, but if someone wants to enter the marijuana market, then just enter the marijuana market. I'm concerned that we're sort of blurring lines here. And I just raise a flag, and I understand the concern about those in the areas where they're struggling, but I was very clear during floor debates that this was something different than cannabis, and I am concerned that we're going to do harm to what was originally intended by this bill, which is to legalize recreation use of cannabis, to address the social inequities that existed as identified by JLARC, and 3, also, of course, help the medical community. So I just want to raise that flag.
Okay, thank you. Now let's just go back to the fundamental questions, because I think we're starting to have a discussion that could meander for quite a bit. So the issues are whether or not we're going to allow for early sales on July 1st, a different date, and whether or not it's supervised by the pharmaceutical, the Board of Pharmacy, or whether we wait perhaps and have the Cannabis Control Authority do that. Delegate Krizek, were you waiting to speak on?
So the I am intrigued a little bit from my colleague out there in the Southwest. Can I ask him a question? I know this is the meandering you were worried about. But so the hemp folks, are they growing it in greenhouses, or is it outside?
Outdoors.
So I've done a little research, and in Colorado, this is a big problem, Mr. Chairman, where the hemp and the cannabis are grown outside, and they're cross-pollinating, and you're getting a stronger hemp and a weaker cannabis situation. And I saw their General Assembly created 3 special committees just to deal with that issue. So it's a big issue. It's a big concern. And I'm not a farmer, so I don't totally understand it, but I do a little gardening. And not in this area. Let's make it clear. I just have 4 plants. But
I'm going to advise you now not to make any further statements. Please speak to your attorney.
My attorney over here is telling me shut up. So, but anyway, how do you envision that, dealing with that situation and with their investment and everything? And I apologize for putting you on the spot there.
No, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. So the cross-pollination can occur fairly easily, and I will say that hemp farmers certainly have the knowledge and expertise to grow marijuana just as much as they would hemp. I'm referring more to the investment that was made in the processing facilities. So if we were to consider allowing hemp processors to be included, they certainly have the capability to grow this indoors.
And there actually is at least one hemp producer that does do indoor growth that I visited myself. So I know that it's not all outdoors, but there's possibility of indoor growth. Okay, Delegate Scott.
As much as I enjoy having this conversation about hemp and dope and rope and all the other things, can we get back to the very narrow question of whether we want to move this up to an earlier date?
Yes.
And I know we have a lot more work to do in committee once this recommendation does make it there on whether it's feasible or not. I know we have a lot of things to consider regarding the Board of Pharmacy, how it's handed off to CCA, does CCA oversee early? I know we have a lot of things that we can work out in committee, but the recommendation from the subcommittee to this committee now, for further discussion, if you want to continue, is whether we want to legalize, move the date of adult use legalization to July 1, 2022, and we can continue to take into account all of the issues raised by Delegate Adams, Senator McClellan, and others as we move forward with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I need to move the previous question? 'Cause that's
No,
what I'm about to
what
do.
I want to ask is,
Oh, okay.
before we move to the previous question, can we have a show of hands of how many people on this dais are comfortable with moving forward with July 1st with the Board of Pharmacy from what they know now? Okay, so I see, I don't see,
With this
with this,
committee continuing on.
continuing this proposal towards July 1st. So that was, okay,
Can we
so
just ask about going up to July 1?
that's what I'm talking about, it's July 1.
All right. I support moving up to July 1.
Okay, so I do not see a majority as of now talking about July 1. So I would.
Can you suggest another month of that year?
Yeah, I want to suggest January 1 with the Cannabis Control Authority personally, or at least January 1, 2023 at least, because that way the referendums will have occurred if there are any.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to muddy the waters. I can change my vote to July 1, provided that we know that regulations can be promulgated in time. That was my
Okay.
concern, is just the
swiftness of getting
yeah,
regulations.
exactly. And I'm not sure how soon.
Let's ask council. Council, do you have any advice on that about July 1 in terms of regulations if it was done by the Board of Pharmacy?
Mr. Chair, if the regulation was done by the Board of Pharmacy, they wouldn't have to make any regulations. We're just going to use what they already have, that's the quickest way to do it. If it was the Cannabis Control Authority, basically what we were instructing them to do was to put something together very, very quickly that models exactly what the Board of Pharmacy already has.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, just take their rules. We don't want them to enforce the Board of Pharmacy's rules. We want them to have their own, which is why we're telling them to promulgate it. But we did, notwithstanding what we did last year regarding the APA, in this language, we gave them a full exemption from the APA. So they would be able to go at rocket speed, no, public comment period or anything like that. But it sounds like, based on what we heard from the administration, that they don't contemplate being able to handle a regulatory scheme, even with the APA exemption, until at least January 1st, 2023.
Okay.
So I think if you're voting on that recommendation, going with the CCA, that would be the earliest date as of now that they are saying they could be comfortable with.
Okay. Okay. So we're at square one again. Sarah McDougall, do you have any feelings on this?
Are you talking a date before the 2024?
Yeah.
That's where
Okay. Okay, so, how many, take a vote on July, okay, so let's have a vote on how, all in favor of beginning adult use retail sales at co-located locations on July 1st, 2022, signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I see 3 ayes. All opposed? Okay, and we've got some abstentions. I hate to move forward without a real consensus, but we do have 3 people out of a large committee. Are there any alternative proposals? For
Mr. Chair,
Sarah McCollum?
I would be comfortable with, and therefore will move that we move forward on January 1st, 2023 under the Cannabis Control Authority.
I would support that motion. How many people would support January 1, 2023 under the Cannabis Control Authority? Okay, so we've got, 3, 6, 7, and, is that an abstention or a no? Is that a no? Okay, 1 no and 1 abstention. Okay, so that'll be the recommendation of this committee that we go with January 1, 2023 under the Cannabis Control Authority. And we do have a number of other items to to discuss. Thank you, Delegate Scott, for your work group, and thanks everyone for bearing with us in this discussion. I prepared, and you were handed and previously emailed a matrix of a number of issues, some that arose from the JLARC report and some from other stakeholders, and one or two for myself to discuss. They're numerous. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through them, and if someone wants to discuss them, if you object to any one of them, please let me know, and we'll pull that one out for discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Pike.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, just before we move on the agenda, and I apologize, but I did want to, in regards to the last motion, which I think is a positive one, because I think there's interest in moving retail sales forward, but I want to make sure as we get towards session, we also look to the investment in social equity. Obviously, the investment of the fees here of $1 million is important, but I think we also need, as we look at the budget items, we need to look at making sure that social equity actually pool of funds is available in advance. If we're rolling out applications, we need to make sure that there's enough sufficient seed money to actually have a successful equity program. And I think there's still much work to be done in that area. Most states, as I understand it, have not had successful programs. And so as we're looking at, this is one good funding source, but I want to make sure we need to be prepared ourselves to make sure whether it's, hemp farmers or medical or others that are looking. I think there's good proposals to help educate and bring folks into the market, but we need to make sure that there is a sufficient amount of seed money, maybe that's the wrong term, available for our program to be successful in Virginia. So I just want to make sure as we advance the timeline, we're also advancing the need for funding. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, and what I anticipate is if all the medical purveyors, I don't know if it's 5 or 6, I think it's 5 currently, that would be about $5 million in seed money that this could, or $4 million in seed money that could be generated at least from that source. On the chart that you received, the first 3 items we had already discussed, the CCA being vested as the single regulatory authority, which is how our last vote proceeded for hemp, Delta 8, Delta 9, cannabis, and pharmaceutical, to allow the seeds and pharmaceutical clones to be sold by pharmaceutical processors, and Delta 8 and 9 to be regulated. Those were things we had already agreed to at our previous meeting. But I'm going to go through the remainder and let's pull some out. First, the ability for businesses to operate under multiple license categories. In other words, to allow for horizontal or vertical integration for additional licenses. I think that's one that probably needs to be discussed rather than just glazed over. The next that we had some discussion before was license caps, about whether or not we allow the Cannabis Control Authority to set any license caps. That's another one that we're going to have to discuss. Now, the remainder, some of them will be easier. License categories. So creating additional license categories for things like delivery services, event spaces, or consumption spaces. I'm assuming people want to discuss that rather than just agree to it at this point.
Sorry. Yes, just, and I'm moving fast. I'm just at consumption spaces.
A place that you could actually use cannabis in a commercial limited public setting. In other words, like a hookah bar or something.
All right, I just flagged that was not intended. I don't remember that even being part of the bill. So this is something
No, it's
new.
not. It's not.
Oh.
Okay, now, so let's flag that one for discussion. I think the next is a little bit easier. JLARC had recommended that we set separate license caps for Class A and B, separating marijuana from hemp, because currently the way the bill was written, both classes count towards the 450 cultivation license cap. Delegate Adams, did you want to comment on that?
You're going through all the things and then coming back.
We're going to come back to all the ones we've mentioned thus far, the first 3. But do you have a problem with the license, with different cultivation categories of licenses? The problem was that it didn't differentiate hemp, which is low THC, from marijuana or other cannabis, they both count towards the 450 cultivation cap. So if you had a resurgence of cannabis growers, you could have a problem with supply. So I'm suggesting that we have separate license caps, or JLARC suggested that. Does anyone object to that? Okay. Then,
Mr. Chair, I just,
yes.
Sorry. It's okay.
go ahead.
I guess my question is, in those license caps, so as everybody knows that, that spectrum of cannabis is, yes, it's low, the hemp is low THC and high CBD rich, but by definition federally, there's that by dry weight, 3% by dry weight. And I guess my question is, while we're doing this, do you want to embed, what is the definition of dry weight for? Because that is not federally regulated. And so like in Vermont, for example, I think their moisture is 13%. And so it's a problem, and it's necessary to define it to some degree because there's too much variability about what that 3% means unless there's a standard of dryness.
I can, I'm not really as familiar as you are. I'd be happy to take any of your considerations into account.
I just wondered if that would be the right place to sort of look at that, since it would be.
Mr. Chair, there may be I see someone in the audience that may have some really good
Sarah
information.
McPike, okay, yes, Megan?
I just wanted to flag, last year you all passed really technical bill that was written by the Department of Agriculture, updating its regs and program to be in better conformance with the federal requirements coming out of USDA. And I remember this being a part of it. I'm not an expert in this, and so I can't tell you, but I would suggest that if it's something you get into, that you bring VDAX into it, because I know that they're currently updating their hemp regs.
Okay, we'll consult with VDAX on that and have to circle
And just
back.
to follow up with that, I mean, that is precisely a bill that I had a huge amount of problem with. And it gets back to actually what I was going to ask the question about, which is, when you're saying that the CCA is going to the regulatory authority for cannabinoids, and then you're listing things like hemp, Delta 8, Delta 9, what I think it is much better if we just say tetrahydrocannabinol, period, because there is, there's zero and there's all kinds of other things being discovered that are not just psychoactive, but intoxicants. And so I think it needs to include the whole category.
Okay, we will have to address that one later then and take that into account. Okay, then JLARC had recommended that we authorize the regulator to create different classes of licenses within each license type, such as different sizes of cultivators. So I think that one shouldn't be controversial unless I hear an objection. Then JLARC also suggested we move up the date for implementing regulations and accepting applications to January 1st, 2023, allowing 1 year for the market to be established. This would in effect be the larger market outside of the co-located locations. There's one that came to us from, I don't know, is Susan Gaston here today? Okay. Sue had raised one about maximum square footage requirements. Do we know, David, do we have currently for dispensaries a limitation on the square feet in last year's bill?
Mr. Chair, there is a square footage limitation. I didn't know if you were talking about dispensaries, current dispensaries, or whether the
for the retail.
I believe it was 1,500 square feet. I'm looking for that stat right now.
So Sue had pointed out that pharmaceutical processors are currently building out dispensaries to be large, as large as 10,000 square feet or plus. And if converted into adult use dispensaries, they could have a competitive advantage over other retail dispensaries. So she was suggesting removing the maximum square footage requirements. Is that an issue that we'll have to discuss further, or does that make sense to folks up here?
Mr. Chairman, does that allow local zoning and
Well, the same as for any other, like, retail establishment or similarly situated establishment, yeah.
Okay, because I mean, I think that was the concern when we discussed it in general laws last year, was that you could have mega stores, you know, with huge square footage, you know.
Delegate Herring, did you have something?
Yeah, no, I understand the intent. I am concerned that by removing the requirement, then that means I can just go buck wild. I can just build out huge.
I'm going to take that as an objection that there's some controversy with it.
Just concern that the wording, yeah, there is concern.
Okay.
Because you can, defeat the purpose.
Okay, then another that Susan's client, Purely Appalachia, had raised was, and I think this brings up what Delegate Moorfield had brought up, allowing a limited number of eligible industrial hemp processor licensees to automatically convert to adult use licenses, like the pharmaceutical processors, to help with the supply. Is that one we're going to want to discuss further, I think? I thought there were some that were not controversial. We'll find some. Then here's one that I had for local authority. I think we should, in terms of zoning, we should prohibit a local ability to apply special use zoning to cannabis businesses unless it's used in other similarly situated businesses. In other words, if you treat an agricultural business a certain way, you could treat a cannabis grower that way. If you treat a retail store a certain way, you could treat a retail store that way. But you couldn't just automatically say, if you sell marijuana, you can't be in this part of town or that sort of thing, or that you need a special use permit. That's my intent, to clarify what we did last year. VACO VML brought to our attention regarding the referendums. They would like to clarify that towns are not subject to a surrounding county's opt-out referendum. In other words, that each municipality could have its own referendum if it so desired, and it couldn't force a town within that county to abide by a referendum that they didn't decide on their own. I had one about hours of retail operations. I think that we made a mistake in last year's bill when we said the localities could limit the hours of retail sale of marijuana without any guidelines. I think we should limit the store's hours to the same hours as ABC stores. Because if a locality doesn't limit a store, I don't think it should be open at 2 in the morning selling intoxicants. And by the same token, I don't think the locality should be able to say they're only open from noon to 5. So that's my intent going forward. Tightening the open container language. Currently, we're referring to open containers when there aren't really official containers. So we could change it to say that open container means any open or unsecured vessel containing marijuana or marijuana products stored in the passenger area of a vehicle.
Can we just,
Delegate Herring.
Yeah, just because that was fast, and can we just put a flag on that? Because
Sure.
That has to be thought through, because there's jurisprudence on an open container law, and you don't want to mess this up.
Okay. Then Justice Forward brought forward an issue about public consumption. Currently, there's an elevating penalty, which is hard to track on the spot, who's already been charged, and also continues likelihood of disproportionate enforcement. So the suggestion they had was to just keep it at $25 fine per offense, as was the state law prior to 2021. Any comments on that?
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, I would note is that prior to 21, it was 18 and up at $25, and now it's 21.
That's correct. So this would be that there wouldn't be an escalating fine, but I see what you're saying. But there is a penalty for people under 21 now in terms of treatment or education that's mandated. Yes. Okay, and then last one, which will generate discussion, was a civil penalty. Right now, there's no escalating penalty if you have more than an ounce to a pound. And the question is establishing a misdemeanor possession amount or an enhanced civil penalty for possession of a larger amount. Is that Senator McPike, did I hear?
So, Mr. Chair, I know that we've all received and I serve on JLARC as well, and I remember when the recommendation came out, and I think there's been considerable discussion about it, and I'm not sure what the answers are, and maybe I think the hesitation is right, is someone gets something and now it's a whole different scale, and now you're talking about really serious sort of criminal penalties. I'm wondering if there's a solution that provides more on the civil side, sort of gradation. I'm not sure I'd be in favor of sort of the misdemeanor actions on the criminal, and finding out, is there something else that sort of provides the warning and the red flags in terms of, hey, you've stockpiled a bunch of product. Maybe that's not a good thing. I defer to other members, but, I certainly listen to the feedback that I've received as a member of JLARC, and, want to find the right solution for folks here.
Is there other discussion about having a disincentive to having more than, to having a larger amount than an ounce or up to a pound? Possession of that. Okay. Well, let's just go back to the beginning of the discussion items and see if we can, if there's any here that we can get any consensus on. The first was allowing for integration for additional licensees, horizontal or vertical integration. And the rationale is that limiting businesses' abilities to operate in multiple license categories increase cost and risk by requiring excessive transport, tracking systems, hampers recall efforts, etc. I don't know if people have feelings on that. Okay. Sarah McClellan.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, as I recall the conversation during the 2021 session, part of the concern around vertical integration was it would be much harder for particularly SWAM retailers to get established and compete. And I'm not sure, at least I can't speak for the House, but at least on the Senate side, I'm not sure that will have changed.
Okay. So I'm not hearing a consensus to revisit that. So I will leave that out. License caps. There had been some resistance to allowing the CCA to set license caps, but I just wanted to bring that forth one last time before we let that go. The arbitrary license cap issue create two issues. Could limit supply early in the market as driving up price and allowing continuation of black-gray market, and invites litigation over licenses. Are there any? Is there any desire to revisit that issue? Delegate Krisak.
I don't remember ever including hemp in the caps. Could maybe is Megan still there? Maybe Megan, do you mind, Mr. Chairman, if she just addresses us, and what was the thinking behind including those two together?
Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up, and David.
This is in regard to the cultivation categories, about having both marijuana and hemp count towards cultivation licenses.
Yep, it's coming back to me. Thank you. The hemp growers are often in a difficult place because when their product's tested, if it's above 0.3%, they have to destroy it, meaning they lose all of their investment for the year. So we created a low THC category for people who are growing rope, not dope. But, environmental factors accidentally made it 0.4% to allow those farmers to not have to completely destroy their product. And the vision here is to, create a little more certainty for cultivators who truly are growing hemp, or perhaps are growing, crop designed for medical products where really the CBD is what's desired more than the THC, and to give them that flexibility, when the day of measuring it comes, if it's right on one border or another.
If I could follow that up, would it make sense, instead of counting them all towards cultivation cap of 450, to have some categorized as hemp cultivation or low THC cultivation and others categorized as cannabis or marijuana cultivation?
Yeah, I hesitate. I think I saw Mark Gribben here from JLARC. Maybe he left. I hesitate to speak to JLARC's recommendation. I know it was Mark who suggested it. I think you all set the caps based on the number of ABC stores. So I'm not quite sure how to balance it, and I'm not, maybe David remembers better than me. I'm not quite sure why JLARC made that recommendation. I do think, these low, it tends to be in the adult use marketplace that really low THC is not the product most desired. That tends to be better for medical patients. So, I don't see, this may actually be, these low THC licenses may actually be a means of adding supply to the medical supply, but I hate to speak for JLARC because it came from them.
Okay, thank you. That was my understanding, is that both classes count to a statewide cap of 450. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is kind of an existential question, maybe Megan can answer. But why have a cap at all for licenses for hemp or for the low THC? Does it?
Some states have struggled with an oversupply, and then you flood the illicit market, or, frankly, businesses just can't make it. So, there's also obligations to the federal government to ensure that your product's not moving across state lines. So seems to be a consensus among states that you want to control the market probably more than with other products. Whether that's statutory or regulatory, I don't know. There could be an argument for it being regulatory because obviously regulations can change more quickly to adapt to what's actually occurring in the marketplace. But I do think it's seen as a best practice for the state to have some means of controlling the amount of product in the state.
Let me make a suggestion. What if I know that, I believe it was the House that first put on the caps. What if we had capped the number of retail spaces by the General Assembly, but had the Cannabis Control Authority handle other license caps? So they could do it to do what's needed for supply and so forth. Is that a happy medium? In other words, I think the biggest concern with the caps was people didn't want to have 5 marijuana stores in one town or something.
Again, I'm concerned that I think and let me just say it plainly, I think it should be all with the authority. I think dividing it up with us having authority on retail, it just doesn't seem, something's not right.
Well, it came from the House initially, so I thought that there was a desire.
Well,
yeah. Okay, so what I'm taking that as is you're willing to let the Cannabis Control Authority handle the number of licenses, and we can always step in if we feel that it's not working right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I mean, yeah, and there was a reason. I think there was stuff
Chairman.
taken out of the bill by the Senate. That's why.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Krizak.
From my recollection, I would say that the debate was 99% of it was around the retail on the in House general laws, and the idea was to kind of mirror the ABC population so that we knew that it's not on every street corner kind of thing. So I think you would have a tough time if you were to take that out of the bill and leave that up to the regulator. But as far as the cultivation or any of the other parts of it, I don't think that was a problem.
Mr. Chair, he's exactly right, because that's not the way my bill was, but you all amended it. That's.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Herring. So what I'm going to say is that allow the CCA to set the non-retail license caps. But the number of retailers to leave it as it is for now, and that can be revisited by future General Assemblies. Okay. Then the next was about creating additional license categories for shared consumption spaces, event spaces, and delivery services. Right now, it's my understanding is that the pharmaceutical providers allow for delivery. Do people have a desire to create additional license categories for shared consumption spaces, like a bar or an event space, or delivery services? Is that of interest to this members of the committee? I'm not seeing overwhelming demand, so I'm going to say we'll leave that as it is. Hemp. Okay, so let's come back to this about whether or not we allow industrial hemp processor licensees to convert to be at least at minimum at cultivation and processing licenses for cannabis. Is there do you have more you'd like to say, Delegate Moorfield?
Well, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, is that there's been significant investment made in 2 hemp processing facilities that I'm aware of, one in Southside Virginia, one in Southwest Virginia. As I mentioned earlier, almost all hemp farmers are not farming because the market's saturated. I think there will be an oversaturation of the market for many years to come. And so this infrastructure is already in place, and I think we should give them the ability to utilize it.
Okay, Ms. Gaston, could I ask you to come forward? I've got a question for you on this. I was wondering, Delegate Krizek could raise the issue of outside cultivation versus controlled greenhouse growing. Were you seeking this with a limitation, or how do you feel about that?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm Susan Gaston. I represent Purely Appalachia, which is a company that is working with a network of farmers, nearly 100 farmers now in Southwest Virginia. To answer your question, we are growing, or anticipate to be growing outdoors. I believe that my client is comfortable with the ability to have that conversion, but we do want to be cautious that we don't allow any similar outcomes for this opportunity as what had happened, as Delegate Moorfield referenced, in the hemp situation a few years ago, where the market became so saturated that the bottom fell out of it and the market has collapsed. And so we want to do what we can to protect our farmers and our growers and our cultivators. And we hope that some of the information that we've shared with all of you over the recent weeks, which I will admit is still evolving. We are still trying to make sure that we have a good opportunity to stand this up properly. And what we provided to you, even most currently, I would suggest to you is not even in the final form of what we anticipate maybe going forward from even our growers.
So do you see problems if they're growing consumer adult use cannabis outdoors? Or is
I know that we want to be cautious. We certainly understand that there are going to have to be public safety measures put in place, and making sure that that property is protected, that the plants are protected. There will not be, I believe, every farmer, and I think Delegate Moorfield may have sort of noted this as well, not everyone may have the financial capability to do that. So that is where the organization that I'm working with within that network will help to provide that opportunity to those various farmers. But that is certainly a very legitimate and valid concern. But I've often heard that growing in the Southwest Virginia region is similar to what Napa is to the wine industry. It is the perfect topography. But we want to be very clear that we are concerned about those safety measures and will take all those precautions as necessary.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say about your proposal to allow some conversion of licenses?
I think you all have that information. I know, again, it's very fluid, even from our client. And so I would suggest that we will continue to have those engagements with all of you. But I can certainly even perhaps send those additional details to you as they're coming together over the next few days, I hope.
Okay. I hope to talk to you about that perhaps next week. So I don't know if the committee is prepared to take an action, but Dawn, Delegate Adams?
So I guess what I'm thinking is, it is concerning outdoor growth. So I guess what my thought would be, if the hemp processors can meet the exact same standards that we have already put in every way for, safety, risk, all of these things, containment, if they meet the exact same standards as the rigorous standards that were put in place for the medical processors, maybe that's a good thing. But if it's anything outside of that, I don't support that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Morefield.
I think what this boils down to is that whether it's being grown indoor or outdoor, is that it's at the risk of the grower. And obviously growing outdoor, there's tremendously much more risk with cross-pollination, and once that's occurred, the crop is destroyed. And so, I think that, at least from the stories that I heard from, dozens of farmers in Southwest Virginia that lost thousands of dollars, and now we have a state-of-the-art processing facility. There are very few farmers that have the means to farm this type of product. And so I think that, we're not talking about thousands of people growing marijuana, but just a few dozen farmers that may have an opportunity to create some additional jobs and revenue. And so, if I'm not mistaken, I think the hemp facility in Southwest Virginia was roughly to the tune of $12 million, if I'm not mistaken, and it's currently sitting idle. And so I think I agree with Delegate Adams' comment that, obviously this has to be well regulated, but the problem that we have is VDAX is regulating hemp. The pharmaceutical processors are regulated by the Pharmaceutical Board, and I just don't see any other alternative for the hemp farmers and the hemp processors. And so any ability that we can give them to open themselves into a new market, I think, is something that we should look at, because the reality is people are not going to be knocking the door down to go build a processing facility in Southwest Virginia or Southside Virginia.
Okay.
Or additional ones.
I'm sympathetic to your request and arguments, and I'm also agree with Delegate Adams that they need to meet the same rigorous standards. So I'm going to table this until I talk further to Ms. Gaston next week, unless there's further comment. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I will add that we completely agree with that mindset. There has to be demonstrated commercial scalability and financial sustainability, without question.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Krizak.
And I will note, and I'm sympathetic, and I think we're going to have to move in that direction. But I will note that the hemp processors didn't go through the RFP process that we will be putting forward for our marijuana growers. So there's a question of fairness perhaps there. But I think we all know that this is a direction we're probably going to have to end up going towards. And I'm sure there's actually some marijuana growing out that way already, illegally.
Okay. Okay. I want to move on the agenda. I think we have a guest here from the. Is Jessica Hendrickson from the Division of Consolidated Labs with us this afternoon?
I'm here, but I'm not with the labs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Lab is here.
Okay. Well, would you like to come forward? There had been some reference in the original bill to laboratory testing capacity, and there had been some discussion as to whether or not it needed to be done commercially, and it was pointed out that we have our state lab, and maybe you'd like to introduce yourself and enlighten us a bit.
Yes, my name is Dr. Marilyn Bibbs Freeman. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services within the Department of General Services. We're the state's only public health, state-level public health laboratory. We do quite a bit of testing. Just for an introduction to our laboratory, we do testing for human sources, environmental sources, as well as food sources. By far, over the last 2 years, our biggest influence has been with the pandemic for COVID-19. However, we do have the ability to test a variety of things, as I indicated, for chemical toxins, microbiological toxins, as well as other chemical solvents, pesticides, and things like that. So that's really just a brief introduction to our laboratory for you. In regards to the role that DCLS can play in this particular situation, we believe that we have some abilities and expertise related to truth in labeling, confirmation of samples that may potentially affect the health and safety of individuals within the Commonwealth, in addition to some information regarding regulatory processes for laboratory testing, and we also can play a consultant role. The DCLS, the Division of Consolidated Labs, we do not wish at this time to take on the testing for the state. It's our recommendation that there be private laboratories available to take on the testing required to ensure the health and safety of the products that are being created. However, in truth in labeling for these products that are being created, we do have the ability to partner with some of our current agencies, for example, VDAX, Consumer Services, for sampling reasons, for testing of products to be sure that they are truthfully labeled as far as what is contained in them. Are they healthy? Are they safe for consumption? We can inform on potential tampering, and we can hopefully mitigate improper reporting by manufacturers or testing labs based on the products that they are actually using. Regarding the confirmation testing of samples that fail health and safety minimal parameters and criteria, we believe we are in a position where we can assist with confirming that that information is true. So the last thing we would want to happen is that producers produce something and they get a failing test result, but it actually not be a good test result. We would like to put ourselves and place ourselves in a position where we can help to confirm that that information is correct before any action is taken place. We do have the ability to test, as I indicated, for pesticides, metals, solvents, toxins, as well as filth, potency, and things like that. From a regulatory standpoint, we are not currently positioned to be able to take on regulation or certification of the laboratory testing processes occurring throughout the state. However, we do have experience establishing these programs, as we do currently run a certification program for environmental and drinking water within the state. We would recommend, due to expediency and with however fast this needs to occur, that an accrediting body, a third-party accrediting body that is knowledgeable of ISO 17025 regulations be utilized in order to regulate the laboratories and accredit the laboratories and inspect them for acceptability from a quality standpoint for the materials that are being produced. If that is not desirable, DCLS does have the knowledge and expertise to certify to standards that would need to be created by the Virginia board. In addition to that, we could learn ISO 17025. We are not currently knowledgeable of that from the standpoint of auditing other laboratories for it, but we have a significant amount of expertise for the NELAC Institute, or TNI regulations, which ISO has mimicked. So we have the ability to bolster our current team in order to meet the need if necessary. And then finally, what we would recommend is a hybrid approach where maybe ISO accreditation is at first used, but DCLS could come in with our partners to determine whether or not there are additional requirements or needs of the state in order to ensure that the products are safe for use and consumption. So I think that's a really broad view of what we could propose to do, but I do want to take the time to just kind of highlight some of the strengths of what we are proposing. Obviously, DCLS has the equipment, the methods, and the expertise in-house in order to provide these services. Our employees are trained to operate, implement, and utilize the equipment necessary to do the testing, and we can perform a consultant role if necessary. We do have a full-scale environmental chemistry and food microbiology laboratory, so the knowledge and expertise lies there as well. We do have an in-house quality assurance team, as I indicated, that is fully knowledgeable of T&I regulations. We are also knowledgeable of ISO regulations, though our certification team does not focus on ISO regulations. We have team members that currently sit on regulatory boards with the creation of regulations that are going into effect, in addition to team members that sit on communities of practice specifically dedicated to determining best laboratory practices for cannabis testing. And finally, I think I would just like to highlight that we maintain relationships with multiple state laboratories throughout the country, and we are continuing to investigate hemp and medicinal marijuana accreditation and certification programs. Thank you.
Thank you for the comprehensive overview. So if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that your lab services could be used for truth in labeling on sampling on a random basis by inspectors that either take a random sample or have reason to believe there's something amiss.
That is correct. We currently perform that role now. We're very adept at doing it.
Okay. And you wouldn't need additional staff to do that for cannabis, or what would your...
We would possibly need additional staff to do that for cannabis. It really just depends on how large this program is going to be and what the scalability of the program will be.
Sure.
But we may need additional staff in order to do that.
Okay, we'll be in touch with you about that. Are there members of the committee who have questions?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair.
Delegate Adams.
Hi, thank you. That was a lot to take in, so I might have missed something. I'm going to just ask a clarifying question. So I hear very clearly that you have the capacity to help, whatever that means. I guess what I'm curious about, but then it also seemed like not quite the capacity to help. So I'm wondering, is it the proposal maybe to have sort of an oversight function that with an MOU or some other thing with entities that would generally carry things out unless there's a problem, or that you had oversight? I'm trying to understand what if you were to propose a solution, sort of all together, because there was many options, what would be the most reasonable of those?
I think one of the things that we can take on immediately would be truth in labeling, as Mr. Chairman discussed. And so that would be a process of surveying the different producers or laboratories doing testing to ensure that the product that you say you're getting is what you're getting. I think the thing that we could also take on is assistance with determining what minimum levels need to be. And so kind of playing a consultant role, we can definitely take on immediately as well. I think the thing that would be lowest on our totem pole is that having DCLS and our certification team actually be the ones going out and auditing the facilities for compliance, mostly based on the fact that there are really no regulations specific for cannabis yet. That is an evolving science right now, an area of specialization, and also there are no Virginia standards currently written. And so that will take time to write the standards, learn the standards, and then audit to them. So that would be lowest on our list of priorities.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Krizak.
So do you create testing protocols that could be used by the private sector?
Typically, we use protocols that have already been established by the Environmental Protection Agency and things like that, but we do have experience creating protocols as well. We do maintain subject matter experts, doctoral level subject matter experts in the building that are very good with research and development, that if we do need to create protocols, that is possible.
Mr. Chairman, have you met with the Public Health Advisory Council that's been created for this?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Tony, who's the director, because I am unaware.
It sounds like they could definitely use. You should.
We have not done that.
Yeah. No. But that's a lot of that's going to be what we wouldn't put it in the bill. That's going to be in the
Regulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Delegate Adams.
And I'm sorry, so are you guys the agency that currently oversees the medical laboratory program, or?
The medical marijuana?
For medical cannabis?
No, ma'am.
Do you know who does that?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you for being here today and for being a resource for us and for your work for the state.
Absolutely, and thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. I see we have in the audience our Secretary of Public Safety. Just want to thank you for being here, Secretary Moran, as a resource. Now, we've come to the portion of the meeting where we can accept public comment for anything that hasn't been. I think we're done with our voting. We voted on the early sales and we discussed some other options, but it doesn't seem like we're quite ready to finalize a policy on the hemp growers and.
You gave ourselves 6 extra months.
Yeah, we've got a little bit extra time, but okay. Are there members of the public who would like to address us? You could take up to 2 minutes if there's anything that you'd like to share with the committee. Okay. Well, this has been a long meeting, but a productive one. I want to thank everyone. Do we have someone who wants to come forward? Okay. Please introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate being able to attend your session. My name is Dr. Michelle Peace. I'm a forensic toxicologist with a research laboratory at Virginia Commonwealth University in the Department of Forensic Science. I'm also the CEO of Cardinal Quality Laboratories. We are a private laboratory that has been stood up to support the medical marijuana program in Virginia. And so we are in the process of finalizing the methods for our analyses so that we can be a full-service lab for the medical marijuana program. And so I also want to just let you know that I am happy to avail myself of the committee so that I can provide some background and understanding as to quality testing. Myself and my partners in Cardinal Quality Laboratories, we've been forensic toxicologists, each of us roughly 20 to 25 years. We have been in the business of developing methodology that is going to be used by the medical marijuana program for all quality testing. And so to that end, if you've paid attention to the news as well lately, VCU just published an article about my work regarding Delta 8 and the quality of products that are in CBD shops and tobacco shops all over the Commonwealth, and with regards to truth in labeling, and the nature of those products is particularly dangerous to the citizens of the Commonwealth. So again, I just want to make sure that you guys know that I am definitely somebody who can provide some commentary as you move forward in some of your decision making.
And you're currently inspecting on contract or medical
Yeah,
suppliers?
right now what we're doing is essentially working with some retailers. We, as yet, do not have a contract with one of the medical marijuana companies. We've been in the process of establishing our methodologies. But we are taking contracts right now.
Okay, great. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has a comment before we adjourn? Okay. Okay, I want to thank everyone for being so.
So I guess, Mr. Chair,
Sarah McClellan.
just so that I'm clear, so the only thing we are recommending to change for the reenactment of what passed in the 2021 session is accelerating retail sales to January 1st, 2023 under the Cannabis Control Authority. Is that right?
That is the main thing, but we also discussed the retail hours being the same as ABC stores.
Well, I mean, we discussed it, but I don't.
Well, I asked if anyone had an objection, but the committee didn't endorse it. No.
Okay,
Right.
I guess that's the only thing officially endorsed by this commission with the vote as a change is that. I'm a little
Yeah.
unclear as to.
Well, let's clarify.
Thank you.
Was the accelerating retail sales at co-located pharmaceutical locations to January 1st, 2023, regulated by the Cannabis Control Authority? But we also talked about allowing for the non-retail licenses to be set by the CCA rather than us, that the number of retailers would remain as was in our bill last year, but that other things like cultivation licenses would be set by the CCA.
But is that a recommendation we're moving? I guess I'm
Well,
unclear as
let's,
to what.
okay,
the
well,
vote
let's,
was.
let me ask if there's consensus or for a vote. In terms of the items that when we went through the discussion list that I didn't hear anyone want to discuss, I should ask if people would instead want to endorse allowing the regulator to create different classes of licenses within license types, such as cultivators, size of the cultivator, to move up the date for implementing regulations and accepting applications to January 1st, 2023, so that they can be applied for before sales go in a wider way. Then the request of VACO VML to separate town and counties for purposes of referendums. My request to limit the hours of retail operations, not by the locality, but rather by the General Assembly to mirror those of ABC stores. That was, is there any objection to us taking those actions in the bill that I'm going to put forward?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
A question, is the commission going to meet before the General Assembly session again, or are these the final recommendations?
I had anticipated this being the last meeting, but if people want to get together on the Monday or Tuesday before the General Assembly convenes to discuss the issue of the hemp growers, we could do that if there's a desire. I think that would be welcome.
Mr. Chairman, a suggestion, and I think I'd like to ask the representative from Purely Appalachia if they're in agreement. But first, if the committee's in agreement, in the event the commission could not meet, should we go ahead and include hemp processors under the same standards as the pharmaceutical processors for the time being?
I think it might merit some more discussion, but that's my intent would be to move in that direction, but I'd be more comfortable if we had a little bit more discussion and people were clear on the standards. Okay, so we'll try and have one more meeting, but the other items I mentioned about having the CCA set non-retail license caps, limiting the hours, decoupling any town referendum from a county referendum.
Mr. Chair, without objection, I would make a motion to do all of that. That we all,
Okay.
that's
Second.
the recommendation thing.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Aye. And
I don't know what.
let me clarify again what
Yes.
we're voting on.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So first, that the regulator can create different classes of licenses within each type of license, such as the size of the cultivators. That the timeline for the VCCA to accept applications, that they may begin implementing regulations and accepting applications beyond the co-located locations to January 1, 2023, allowing a year for the market to be established. Then that localities would have the prohibit localities from applying special use zoning to cannabis businesses unless it's used on similarly situated businesses. In other words, agricultural like agricultural, retail like retail. Then, as I said, the separate town and county referendums. The town could have a referendum, a county could have a referendum, it wouldn't apply to each other. The hours of retail operations would be set by us rather than the localities, and we would limit them. My intent is the same as ABC stores. Lastly, we didn't discuss this, but there was a recommendation that public consumption is currently an elevating penalty that's not being tracked, that it just be one penalty for public consumption. of the $25 per offense as it was previously. Those are the items which I thought we would, might be able to gain consensus on. Delegate Adams?
I'm sorry, I have another question.
Oh, after we do this? Okay. Okay, so are we clear then on what we're voting on? Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Abstention.
One abstention?
Let's not voting against everything. One no down here.
One no and one abstention. Okay.
He reserving his,
so-
Mr. Chair.
to change his mind.
Delegate Adams, I just want to say that still on the table to be discussed at our next meeting is the issue of hemp processors, and if we get statistics from the Department of Corrections on any resentencing policy, because that's still something that we had a presentation on in a previous meeting. I don't have those stats as to which offenses and how many people might it apply to. But Delegate Adams.
Yeah, that was actually my question, if we were going to discuss the resentencing policy, so thank you.
Yeah, I think folks had received public comment on that, but I really be more comfortable. We know how many people this is applying to, so we can talk to some of the lawyers on the committee about what makes the most sense.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. I'll
Delegate
Senator McClellan
Adams.
first. I'll never go before her.
Scott.
I will never go before Senator McClellan. She's
Senator
only-
McClellan, you've been yielded to.
Thank you. Other than the lab testing, I did not hear discussion, unless I just couldn't hear it down here, on equity and reinvestment, legal access, and public safety. When we were walking through the chart, the last thing I heard referenced was the criminal justice section. And then we skipped ahead and heard on the lab testing, but I did not hear us walk through the remainder, to see if anybody wanted to discuss or adopt or do anything with the remaining two. Will we do that at our next meeting?
We can come back to those items, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so I think this meeting, unless there's anything
Mr. Chair?
further. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Scott.
I know I'm easily forgettable.
No.
I got some information from the State Crime Commission this week on marijuana convictions across the state. Most serious offense for state responsible folks. And I think the number as of August 31st of 2021, there were 570 state responsible inmates confined that have convictions for 599 marijuana-related offenses. So 570 folks there. There are 341 inmates with one or more convictions for a marijuana distribution offense. And among those, 331 had a most serious offense that was not marijuana-related. So I'm hopeful that in the next meeting that we have, we can get someone from DOC or the Crime Commission who can ferret this data out, tell us who is marijuana-related only, or what their other offenses are, so then that we can come up with some kind of way to account for the fact that we have legalized this, and there may be people sitting in jail while these folks who are sitting in our audiences with ties on are about to make a lot of money. So I'm hopeful that we can correct that inequity during the next session as soon as possible, so we can fix that. And then, so I think we do need to have, I think it's a must that we have another meeting to deal with that issue, even if it's that issue alone. That is a huge issue. You talk about equity, that's larger than the financial equity that we're talking about. These are people's lives, and it's literally hundreds of folks still sitting in jail for marijuana-related offenses, and we need to do something about it.
Yes,
So,
we'll seek those statistics and make it a prime topic along with hemp and the others that weren't addressed.
and then my second question is related to the concerns that around the hemp growers. I really had a question from the hemp folks and the pharmaceutical processors. Are y'all talking? Because I think some of the concerns that are being raised, y'all need to have a date, go out and get dinner, and then come back to us so that we will know that there is peace in the valley or not around how you protect the public, make sure that we have safe product make sure that we have some equity goals on both sides. I think looking at the data in the Commonwealth of Virginia, looking at the poverty data, folks may assume that majority of the poverty is in places where I come from, but Southwest has just as much poverty. I was looking at, I think the last data I saw, Dickinson County might have the highest poverty in the Commonwealth. So I think there are a lot of conversations that need to be had on both, so y'all could come to us with some ideas around what the pharmaceuticals are now being, how they're being tested, how they're being regulated, and how the hemp growers can fit into that model if it's possible. If it's not, we need to know. Otherwise, we won't wasting our time. So it'd be very nice to have you guys go out on a date, sit down, talk, have some wine, and come back with some conversation with us in this next meeting of how this is possible so that we don't have to create all of this from whole cloth. Thank you. Is that doable? Delegate, since you'll be the next committee chair in the House, is that doable? All right. Yeah, all right.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Herring, could you have a comment?
Just, yeah, for the hemp farmers, I mean, it would be helpful for more information, sort of how many farms have been impacted by, this oversaturation. And I agree with Delegate Scott, see what can be done, because, equity is equity and poverty is poverty. And I just, if numbers and would be helpful to know, and as well as we look at the numbers of the licensing, but, yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so we will get notice out about when we're able to next meet before session, and unless there's anything further, we will stand adjourned.